welcome to week 2 of Lent Life Job, where we are sitting down with Doug Brown. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Would you mind just giving a brief introduction for anybody who may not know you and a role you play at the church?
I'm Doug Brown. I've been with Element since almost day one. Have been on the board, I think, most of that time. I've been the treasurer most of that time.
Well, welcome. Aaron, before we jump in, would you mind giving a brief recap?
So today we hit Job chapter 2, where we start talking about Job's wife and her response to what Job is going through. And really the whole thing you want to see by the end of it is who was more valuable in Job's heart and life than God himself. Job's wife gets to a point where she's so angry and depressed and not really understand what's going on that she's like, just curse God and die and let's just get this thing over with. And a lot of times for us, that kind of takes place when we don't want to really learn what God wants to teach us. We just want to get through something. And what you'll see through the book of Job is that God has something he really does want to teach Job. And that is ultimately in the end, God should be more precious to us than anything else in the world.
So Doug, we actually thought of you to be our guest today because you have had some calamity in your life. We were hoping that you would share a little bit about your journey that God has brought you through. And ultimately, we'd love to talk about kind of how Pam, your wife, responded and then how you responded back to her. And I already see tears.
It is an emotional aspect.
Show us your
of
boils.
life.
Show us your boils.
It'll come out in tears. And a number of things in my life have occurred that actually, in looking back, were they things that at the time I thought would ever have a future purpose? Absolutely not. They're devastating events. You lose a brother at the age of 12. What does that do to you? At that age, it was confusion. You lose your dad at the age of 25. What does that do to you? Well, at that point, it was more anger and not understanding, but trying to figure out some purpose, some meaning, some value. Lost another brother at the age of 31. By that point, I was starting to put some pieces of life together, and that life is fragile, life is not guaranteed. There's no guarantee I'm going to go home tonight. But each of these were all violent accidents. First one was a car accident, second one was a motorcycle accident, third one was an airplane crash. But you learn from life experiences. Assuming you get through them, you learn from them. You adapt to them. You hopefully learn positively and not negatively. A lot of people go the other direction.
Go back and talk about when your daughter was in the hospital.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so Sydney was born in 1996. At 5 weeks, she was not gaining weight. She hadn't gained any weight. Fortunately, she was born large baby. I think she was 11, 12 pounds.
She had some to lose.
So it wasn't drastically noticed even initially, but ended up in the hospital. And we got there rather abruptly. The doc finally saw us and said, "You need to go to the hospital, and you need to go now." We were in Santa Barbara an hour and a half later, about 7 o'clock at night. And we went through the next day of testing. And I think either late that day or early the next day, the doc came in and said, her body is not able to process protein. So she doesn't have, he told us whatever it was, the enzyme that processes protein, and there is no cure. By that night, the doctor came in. That afternoon, I think, said, you need to start saying your goodbyes. She probably won't make the night.
Why would you over and just hug you?
Thought of losing a child is much more impacting than losing a brother, losing your dad, because those are things outside of your household. They're outside of they're easier to separate. Well, you lose a child, and I can't imagine, because we didn't lose her.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, what would that have done to my faith?
Mm-hmm. Well, what was your prayer in that moment?
Oh, save my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
I think when you told me that story once, you said that you were praying to God and you said, God save her and I will never question you again.
And that's yes. I mean, there's you're cautioned to not bargain with God. There is no bargaining. Probably reminded God of my prior losses. How many more do I get to tolerate, survive? But you're purely at His mercy of survival or not. Mm-hmm. And I had prior examples of not surviving, that I wasn't very optimistic, but I was still talking to God, which I thought was that's a good thing at that point, that you're still conversing. To me, the ones that I worry about are people who quit talking to God and just completely close that door, and it's tough to recover from that. How you respond in those moments, and I will say that the outcome could determine where would I be, what would I be doing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Sydney hadn't made it that night. So woke up the next morning, they ran a test at about 7:30 in the morning, and they said, we have no explanation other than her body is processing protein. So I think a day later we left the hospital, and she was just a normal baby from that point on, started gaining weight, and she was a beautiful young infant girl at that point, 5 weeks old.
So now you fast forward to a few years ago.
Yep. So
everything seems to be going okay in your life. And
right. I mean, got boys graduating from college, and the kids are doing well, and so 2012, get a first diagnosis of cancer.
Now that's because you had something growing that wasn't going away, or
swelling in the neck.
Yeah.
Lymph nodes were swelling, and you feel it for a few days, and you're thinking, it feels like a stiff neck.
Everyone who's neurotic is now going to be going, oh my goodness, I got that.
No, it's conspicuous when it does happen, but it didn't take the doctors too long to figure out that it was lymph nodes, and then it took some testing to identify that it was lymphoma. I didn't realize the seriousness of it until the doc starts crying.
Really?
I mean, I'm oblivious to anything medical, and he kept a straight face for about 3 to 10 seconds, and finally he just starts tearing up, and he goes, it's lymphoma. And Pam I'm just sitting here. He's tearing up because he had to give that news to one of his fellow nurses, a fellow staff member, and it was difficult for them. And again, I'm starting to get the seriousness of it by that point in time. So moving forward from that, you find the oncologist, and you get your diagnosis, and there's a treatment plan, and you start going through all that. And Pam and I identified early on that, regardless of survival, whether you live through this or you don't, let this be of God. Trying to present that to your kids without getting teary, without getting upset about things. And we weren't, what's interesting through the whole process, I was never angry at God, at the doctors, it was okay. And I think I was able to do that because of previous occurrences in my life of, life is fragile. We aren't guaranteed to be here beyond now. So if I live or I die, I have the glory of going to God and
So how does Pam respond? This happens, and Job's wife is curse God and die. I don't think Pam's that way. Pam's probably like, you're not going to die.
Especially with her knowledge of
Yeah.
all the medical, how was that
She'd be
dynamic?
like, don't rub mud in your boils.
So it was a blessing. You know, her medical knowledge and background and career as a nurse is absolutely wonderful to have around, but at times I get to play the dumb and stupid card, and I can, I don't know. She's very aware of the reality of percentages of probability of death and survival versus survival. You finally come to the end of it, and they stop the chemo. They don't stop the chemo until you've got a relatively clean PET CT scan, and then they don't use the word cured, at least for my cancer. They call it remission, but they don't really use that word. Right now, you don't have active cancer.
So, I mean, but yours came back. Was there a difference in the reaction of Pam from the first time to the second time?
Not really.
Okay.
She's a very strong and supportive person, probably to the point of hiding some true emotions, but we're pretty open and honest with each other, and I didn't ever see a doubt.
Last week, Pete talked about how, in the middle of like a big train wreck or kind of, it's everybody's praying together and moving forward together, and he and his wife are like on their knees with God together. He goes, and when things are better, he goes, it just kind of goes back to the way it was before, and it's not gonna. Did you find that true for you, like after everything's cleaned up and done?
Absolutely. When life is easy, the last thing you're thinking about is, thank you, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
This is cool. Mm-hmm. But you're not thinking about it in appreciation to God's grace of allowing you to be there.
It's like the pleasure and pain. Sometimes it's during the pleasure in those places that we cease to think about who God is so much more than we cease to think about him in the pain.
Oh, you absolutely grow from the pain, from the struggles, from the difficult times is when you really, it's when you're thinking about it, you're processing. Where is God in this process? And once you come to terms with your mortality and, God is in control, it's much easier to go through these trials.
So it sounds like God really, your understanding of life and death really became grounded in reality.
Yes.
But I also wanted to ask, through any of these times, did God really show you what was more precious to you in your life than him?
I think he showed me his hierarchy in that process. Because without him, does anything else matter? If I hadn't been able to think back and relate to God through each of these processes, granted it got much more logical on the latter ones, I don't know how I would have gotten through them. His importance to me has certainly increased in each occurrence, each event in my life.
A parallel question with probably the same answer is, have you seen how God brings about his things for his glory and your good? And I think everything you just said it reaches that your good. Like, it is good to love God in proper order to other things. Have you seen how God's glory has been magnified through those times?
Absolutely, for me, and I think for my family. I know for Pam, knowing that I'm not in control, in spite of my best efforts and whatever decisions I make. In the end, it's going to be God's course of action that I might. Do I influence it? Not if God doesn't want me to.
You're secondary, he's primary.
Very, very, very much so.
And I think, when we talk about this stuff, like this is a kind of a heavier one, but yet it's not meant to be depressing, because it's exciting, because God is glorified, he is good, no matter what happens. Good things come out of that on the backside, and there's so much that we learn. So it's still a very joyous thing, even though it sounds very somber and heavy.
Life is great. I mean, what would I change? 20 years ago, I'd have said, not losing a family member, not losing a brother, what have you. But I'm not sure that it's mine to change. I know it's not mine to change. But I don't know I think what I The life I live today is a result of those occurrences.
Yeah, I like what Job says. Shall we not accept the good?
Right.
If you take that and divide it from the second part of it, it's like, shall we not accept the good? Of course,
I mean, I look at the blessings in my life, and I don't think of the cancer as it happened, but it didn't affect the blessings in my life.
Well, thank you, Doug. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your heart and your journey that God has brought you through. And
Thank you for thinking of me.
we're glad you're here, for sure, with us. And for you, like Aaron said, this wasn't meant to be just a downer, even though it is sad and it hurts to hear your pain. But it is a way for us to rejoice of what God does and how He works through calamity and hurt and pain. And thankfully, your daughter and you are obviously still with us, and she's engaged now, so that's exciting. But we can rejoice on the other side of things. And in the midst of the calamity, we can sit with each other, which comes next week.
Yep.
And so we'll pick that story up next week in Job. Bye. Welcome to week 2 of life. I always say life first.
It's okay.
Always. Anyways. Welcome to week 2 of Lent Life Job.
Oh no!
Sorry.
Sorry.
I had to buy shoes for Logan's wedding. I bought one pair. They didn't pass the formal, so I had to go buy another pair. So I bought these cheap. Man, my feet hurt bad by the end of the night.
But yet, they matched and worked.
Yes, they did.
You never have to wear those things again.
I'm afraid I am not gonna wear them for Sid's wedding. I'll go buy something else. These are terrible.